At our weekend away, our church weekend away back in March, we had a session thinking about who we want to be as a church family, some of the things that we'd love to do together as a church. And one of the things that came up and that was asked for was some help, some Bible teaching, thinking about serving. And you asked and we listened, and that's what we're going to be doing for the next 3 weeks. We're doing a mini series exploring the theme of service in the Christian life. And we're going to be focusing on serving in church life, but much of what we'll think about will be transferable to other areas of life, whether that's serving your family or serving in the workplace, whether that's serving in the public square, whatever it may be. We trust there's some helpful transfer in what we're going to be thinking about. And we'll spend time exploring some of the different ways that we can serve. We'll think about how we can keep going in our service, and maybe even when we should stop, because that's the wise thing for us to do. I will think about ourselves plenty, but our starting point today is not us. Actually, we're not going to start by thinking about ourselves. But we're going to think about Jesus Christ and how he serves us. You see, what we need most of all is not opportunities to serve others, but to be served by Jesus. At least that is, we need to be served by him if we're going to serve with our hearts in the right place, and if our service will last into the long term. So I don't know, you may join our door knocking team because you care about the community that God has placed us in. You may serve in our Sunday school because you love children. You may play in our music team because you enjoy helping people praise God in song. You might help setting up on a Sunday morning because you love doing things alongside other people. That's the sense of in it together. And all those are really, really good things. But when you face the rejection of another door being shut in your face, or as occasionally happens, the children aren't behaving in a particularly lovable way, or there are creative differences in the band, or no one else turns up to do the chairs, and you're left doing it all on your own. Well, in those moments, serving others can become a chore. And the thing that has been motivating us to serve stops our service rather than sustaining it. But if Jesus and his service of us is the sort of fuel in our tank, so to speak, then we've got all we need. Because his is the fuel that never runs out, and his is the fuel that never backfires, that never goes wrong. That never causes us to stop serving. It always sustains us. We need to be served by Jesus if we're going to be serving others. And that brings us to this reading we had from Mark chapter 10. And our destination is right at the end. We're heading towards verse 45. That's where we're going to camp out, as I hope we will see. It's an astonishing verse, astonishing what Jesus says there. But we're going to take a bit of a run-up just to put it in its context. So where are we in Mark 10? Well, you can see perhaps if you look across the page to the headings that we've just had Jesus speaking to the rich young man. And he said to this rich young man who wants to come into the kingdom of God, well, here are some of the things that you'll need to leave behind if you want to go in to that kingdom. And this man who arrived seemingly having so much goes away from Jesus crestfallen, because actually he realizes in his plenty he has nothing. And after that encounter, we read verse 32. They were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished. They couldn't believe what they just heard, while those who followed were afraid. Again, Jesus, took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. We are going up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise." The disciples, still reeling from what they've heard him say to the rich young man, then hear Jesus say, actually, it's not just the rich young man who has to give up something to enter the kingdom of God. Jesus says, no, for that to be possible, for anyone to come into that kingdom, I need to lay down my life. I need to give something up. And into this atmosphere of self-denial, 2 of the disciples speak up. And James and John make the most extraordinary request. Verse 35, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he replied. He asked. So they replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I'm being baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Now, spoiler alert, they can't. And their request is so audacious. Actually, they don't even realize it. "You don't know what you're asking for," Jesus said to them. But because suffering for following Jesus will come their way, James, he becomes the first martyr among the apostles. John will be exiled. Well, Jesus continues, middle of verse 39. "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they've been prepared." Well, no doubt, James and John heard that and their shoulders slumped. The disappointment started to sink in. But then things got even worse as the other disciples heard what they'd requested. Verse 41, when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Oh. Jesus had just said no, and now all their mates are really, really annoyed at them. And it could be that the other 10 disciples realized what it was that James and John were asking, and they're indignant because they're horrified at how this reflects on them as a group of disciples. But I think actually, based on what Jesus goes on to say, the other 10 are just annoyed that they didn't get there first and they didn't make this request before James and John. Why is that? What does Jesus say? Well, verse 42, he called them all together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them." And you can almost hear James and John nodding along in the background saying, "Yeah, that's right. That's what we want, a piece of that." After all, they clocked that there was something special about this Jesus. He had an authority. He had a power that others didn't. And they thought if they could sort of get close enough to him, if they could be at his right and his left in his glory, well, some of that power and prestige might rub off on them. And who knows? I mean, they might not put it like this, but then maybe they have people that they could exercise authority over, that they could lord it over, perhaps. They'd end up with some people below them, they think. Because that's what happens, isn't it? When you have authority, when you're in a position of power, you have people below you to serve you. Earlier in this week, I came across an article on the Business Insider website that was talking about the number of people who work in the royal household. Apparently, there are 1,133 people who work for the king, and they have some wonderful jobs. I had to scroll through the long list. I think my favorite is, whoever this is, the yeoman of the glass and china pantry. Now, that person is not to be confused with the yeoman of the plate pantry, or indeed the yeoman of the silver pantry. And I think they all have under yeoman, whatever the right word for that is. Because when you're the monarch, you don't just need one people to look after your crockery, you need a lot, because you have an awful lot of plates and knives and forks. You see, the more authority and power you have, the more people you have to serve you. And that's what James and John, I think, are after here. But what does Jesus do? He turns it all on its head. He continues to talk to the disciples, verse 43. Not so with you. Don't seek people to lord it over. Don't seek people to have authority over. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must first be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. And then the bit we're going to spend the rest of our time dwelling on. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, if you've been around church Christians, you've known Jesus for a bit. If you've been in that world for any length of time, Jesus saying this probably doesn't come as that much of a surprise to you. And in fact, even if this is the first time you've ever stepped foot inside a church, but you've grown up in the West, then, and I say the West because that's, I think, where the influence of Christianity runs deepest. If that's you, I don't think you'd be that surprised by Jesus' words either. Because broadly speaking, our society, it esteems service. It sees it as a good thing to do. Make what you will of David Cameron's return to frontline politics this week. But I thought the first thing he said in his very first interview after becoming Foreign Secretary was striking. These are the first words out of his lips. Well, I know it's not usual for a Prime Minister to come back in this way, but I believe in public service. You know, he resigned from a bunch of no doubt well-paid post-Downing Street appointments to rejoin a government that all the polls are predicting will lose the next general election by a landslide. And why has he done that? Well, he tells us because he believes public service is a good thing. And even if he has an ulterior motive in saying something like that, well, I don't know. Even if he has an ulterior motive, it still proves the point, doesn't it? That because he knows that commitment to public service is something our society thinks much of. And so it's a good thing for him to say. But here's the thing. I think without Jesus' influence, it would never have crossed anyone's mind to say something like that. Jesus, he's normalized something that came as a massive surprise to the disciples, to his closest friends and followers. And were it not for the way that his influence has shaped our culture, it would come as a massive surprise to us. Were it not for Jesus, the rulers of the Gentiles lording it over them, the high officials exercising authority over their people, that would be the norm. That would be what we'd expect. That would be what we might even esteem. But what does Jesus say? Have a look at verse 45 again. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Did you notice Jesus doesn't say the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve? What does he say? Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. In other words, if anyone could reasonably have expected not to serve, but instead to be served, it's the Son of Man. And yet even he, even the Son of Man, did not come to be served, but to serve. The Son of Man is a title that Jesus uses to speak of himself, and it comes from that reading we had from the Old Testament book of Daniel. Why don't you flick back there with me, page 893. And in this passage, Daniel, one of the Old Testament prophets, is recalling what he saw in a vision. Page 893, and then let me read from just verses 13 and 14 of Daniel 7. Daniel says, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, that is God himself, and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." Who's this Son of Man? Who is it that Jesus claims to be? Well, Daniel tells us he's the one who has God's authority to reign over all nations for all time. He's the one who's worthy of worship by everyone, everywhere. He's the one who has all the power, which by rights means he should be served by all the people. All the pomp, all the circumstance of the royal household are nothing compared to what is due to the Son of Man. And yet, what does he say? Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus, the most powerful individual ever to walk the face of the earth, uses power not for his own sake, but for our sake. And so when Jesus, when the Son of Man looks at you, he doesn't see a pawn to use in his plans. His focus isn't on what he could do with your gifts and your talents and your abilities. And indeed, neither is he preoccupied by your fears and your failings and your foibles. Now, when the worship-worthy, authoritative Son of Man looks at you, he sees someone he wants to serve. I love how a guy called John Hindley puts it in this book, Serving Without Thinking. It's the one I've put on the service sheet as recommended reading if you'd like to think more about how Jesus serves us. It's got a new cover since my one came out. Here's what he says. Speaking about Jesus coming to serve instead of be served, he writes this. Jesus chose the fisherman Peter to be his follower, but it wasn't because he needed Peter's fish. He chose Matthew, the tax collector, but not because he wanted his accounts done. When a rich young man wanted to follow him, Jesus didn't flatter him in order to get funding for his mission. He let the man walk away. When the respected and influential religious leader Nicodemus came to see him, Jesus didn't try to convince him to endorse his approach to ministry. Instead, he said to all of them, "Follow me, and I will serve you. Follow me, and I will serve you." That's what Jesus is like. That's what the Son of Man wants to do for me and for you. And you know what? He comes to serve us by doing the thing we most need. He doesn't come to serve us by ensuring we're fruitful in our workplaces or that we have financial security or fulfilling relationships, as good as all those things would be. What does he say? Flick back 10:15, Mark 10, if you've turned away from it. He did not come to be served, but to serve. Why? To give his life as a ransom for many. That's how Jesus came to serve us, by giving his life as a ransom for us, by dying for us on that cross, to pay the price to set us free from the captivity of our sin, free from our self-destructive tendencies, from the compulsion that we have to indulge in hurtful behavior, from the inevitable distance that brings between us and God. He came to restore, to reconcile, to remake us by being a ransom for us. That's how he serves us. He set aside his power, his privilege, his position to save us by serving us. And there's a whole nother talk we could have there, digging into that. But here's what I want to see just for now. His serving us in this way doesn't just save us. To be sure, that's the main thing it does. They're the dots Jesus joins, aren't they? Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Why? To give his life as a ransom for many. But his service of us, it also frees us to serve others. I don't know about you, but sometimes we struggle to serve because, if we're honest, we think a bit too highly of ourselves, like James and John were doing. But when we realize that we need Jesus to serve us, it sort of grounds us in God's reality. That apart from him, apart from Jesus, actually we have nothing to offer, nothing to think much of ourselves about. But sometimes the reason we struggle to serve is actually the opposite. We think too little of ourselves. We wonder how we could possibly be any use to anyone ever. Well, in those moments, Jesus serving us lifts us up. As we remember that when he looks at us, he sees someone who is worth his while serving. Maybe other times we just feel weary in service. And you know what? Again, in those moments, Jesus serving us helps. Because when we feel weary, when we feel burdened by what we're doing, when we fear what might happen if we continue to serve, well, how Jesus has served us helps us to trust him. After all, he's taken our biggest burden. Can't we trust him with this littler one? And sometimes, of course, we love serving, and it's wonderful, and it's enjoyable, and that's something to celebrate. But if you want to keep loving it into the long haul, just make sure the right fuel is in your tank. Just to make sure it's Jesus who's sustaining you and his service of you that's keeping you going. Because if it's not, when your circumstances change, that service may become not something you love, but something you loathe. You see, whatever's going on, looking to, enjoying Jesus, the awesome, authoritative, worship-worthy Son of Man, that will always help us. It'll help us in our service. It will help us in any aspect of the Christian life. Which is why what we're going to do now is share the Lord's Supper together. A really tangible reminder of what we've been thinking about, that even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.